The semi-truck's horn blared through the thunderstorm as Maya Chen, 27, with warm olive skin and rain-soaked dark hair plastered against her face, lay unconscious in the middle of the highway, her modest blue waitress uniform torn at the shoulder, blood mixing with rainwater beneath her motionless body, and the 18-wheeler was only 4 seconds away from ending her life forever. In that same frozen moment, a man in a deliberately worn gray hoodie and faded jeans sprinted from his deliberately modest sedan, his muscular frame cutting through sheets of rain, knowing that if he hesitated even one heartbeat longer, this stranger would die before his eyes. What Maya couldn't know, what no one watching would ever guess, was that the man throwing himself toward certain death to save her was Alexander Reid, 32, whose face never appeared in magazines despite his family controlling a $47 billion technology empire, a man who had spent 8 years hiding from the world that destroyed his ability to trust, and who was about to have his carefully constructed invisible life shattered by a woman he'd never met. The stakes were absolute, her life hung by 3 seconds, his anonymity hung by his choice, and neither of them understood yet that this rain-soaked highway would become the birthplace of a love story that would challenge everything they believed about fate, worth, and what it truly means to save someone. Alexander's body slammed into Maya's just as the truck's brakes screamed against wet asphalt. He rolled them both toward the shoulder, gravel tearing through his hoodie and into his back, the truck missing them by inches as its horn faded into the storm. His arms wrapped protectively around her unconscious form, his heart pounding so violently he could hear it over the thunder. She was breathing. Barely, but breathing. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and called for an ambulance, giving a location but refusing to give his name. As he waited, cradling this stranger's head in his lap, he noticed the calluses on her palms, the worn soles of her shoes, the small name tag still pinned to her uniform that read Maya, with a tiny hand-drawn smiley face beside it. Something stirred in his chest that he hadn't felt in years, not since before his father's public scandal, before the betrayals, before he'd learned that his last name was a curse that attracted only vultures dressed as lovers. Maya woke 3 days later in a private hospital room she definitely couldn't afford, surrounded by machines that beeped in gentle rhythm and flowers she didn't remember receiving. A nurse with kind eyes informed her that an anonymous donor had covered all her medical expenses, every scan, every treatment, every specialist. Maya's throat tightened. She worked double shifts at the diner and taught free piano lessons at the community center on weekends. She had no savings. Her mother's memory care facility bills consumed everything she earned, and she'd been quietly preparing to give up her tiny apartment to afford another month of her mother's treatment. Who would pay thousands of dollars for a stranger? The nurse handed her a simple white card with no name, only handwritten words, "You matter more than you know. Get well." Maya pressed the card to her chest and sobbed, not from pain, but from the overwhelming sensation of being seen by someone she couldn't see, saved by someone she couldn't thank. Alexander watched the hospital from a coffee shop across the street, his plain black baseball cap pulled low, his designer watch deliberately left at home. He told himself he was just making sure she was okay. He told himself this was simply human decency, not obsession. But when he saw her through the window 3 days later, sitting up in bed, holding his card, crying with what looked like gratitude rather than sadness, something cracked open inside him. He'd spent so many years surrounded by people who wanted his money, his connections, his family name, people who smiled with calculated precision and touched him with acquisition in their eyes. His last relationship had ended when he discovered his girlfriend of 2 years had been feeding information to a tabloid for monthly payments. Before that, a business partner had attempted to manipulate him into a marriage with his daughter to secure a merger. Alexander had learned to trust no one, to reveal nothing, to hide behind anonymity like armor. But this woman, Maya, didn't know who he was. She couldn't want anything from him except perhaps a simple thank you. And somehow, impossibly, that made her the most trustworthy person he'd encountered in a decade. Maya was discharged with strict orders to rest, but rest wasn't a luxury she could afford. She returned to the diner the next day, hiding her lingering headaches behind her practiced smile, pouring coffee and memorizing orders and pretending her body wasn't screaming for relief. That's when she noticed him, a quiet man in the corner booth, ordering only black coffee and a plain bagel, spending hours with a paperback novel that looked genuinely worn from reading. He had tousled dark brown hair, a strong jawline softened by an almost shy demeanor, and gray-green eyes that seemed to carry storms of their own. His clothes were simple, a flannel shirt, well-fitted jeans, work boots that looked legitimately used. He tipped generously but not extravagantly, always exactly 20% plus a few dollars. He came back the next day. And the next. And when Maya finally worked up the courage to ask his name, he looked up from his book with an expression that was almost startled, almost vulnerable. "Daniel," he said, using his middle name without hesitation. "Daniel Matthews." It was the first lie he'd told in years, and it tasted like survival. Maya found herself looking forward to Daniel's visits with an embarrassing intensity. He was different from the other regulars. He actually listened when she spoke, his attention focused and genuine. He noticed when she winced from residual pain and wordlessly slid his untouched glass of water toward her with a gentle, "You should stay hydrated." He asked about her mother, about her piano students, about her dreams, and he remembered every answer. When she mentioned she'd always wanted to see the northern lights, his eyes lit up like she'd handed him a secret. When she described how her father had taught her piano before passing away when she was 12, he reached across the table and briefly touched her hand, saying nothing because nothing needed to be said. She didn't know that later that night, Daniel, Alexander, would spend 3 hours researching the best places to view auroras and another 2 hours donating anonymously to her community center's music program. Their friendship deepened slowly, like roots growing beneath soil. Daniel started offering to walk Maya home after her late shifts, claiming he lived nearby when actually he drove 45 minutes from his modest rented apartment, the one he kept specifically to maintain his anonymous life, far from his family's estate. They walked through lamplight and shadow, sharing stories with the hesitant bravery of people who had been hurt before. Maya told him about watching her mother's memories fade, about the guilt of sometimes wishing she could have her own life while simultaneously being terrified of the day her mother wouldn't recognize her at all. Daniel told her about a father who valued image over integrity, about learning that his name was a weapon others used against him, about the loneliness of wondering if anyone would love him without knowing his bank balance. He just didn't tell her the exact numbers involved. One evening, walking through a park after her shift, Maya stopped beneath an old oak tree and looked up at Daniel with an expression that made his heart stutter. "Can I tell you something strange?" she asked. He nodded, not trusting his voice. "Ever since my accident, I keep thinking about the man who saved me. I never saw his face, I was unconscious. But sometimes I dream about him. About someone appearing out of nowhere in my darkest moment and choosing to catch me when everyone else would have kept driving." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I know I'll probably never find him. But whoever he is, wherever he is, I need him to know that he didn't just save my life. He made me believe that maybe the world isn't as cold as I thought it was. That maybe strangers can be angels without wings." She laughed softly, embarrassed. "Sorry, that sounds ridiculous." Daniel's throat was so tight he could barely breathe. He wanted to tell her. God, he wanted to tell her everything, that he was the one on that highway, that he'd thought about her every single day since, that saving her had somehow started to save him. But the moment he revealed the truth, he'd have to explain why he was there, why he'd paid her bills, and eventually, inevitably, the lie about his name would unravel into the larger lie about his life. She would look at him differently. Everyone always did. So instead, he simply said, "He's lucky he could be there for you." And Maya smiled at him with such warmth that Alexander Reid, hidden billionaire, realized he was falling in love with a woman who didn't know he existed. Cliffhanger 1. 3 weeks later, Maya's mother's facility called with devastating news. The memory care center was closing in 60 days due to funding issues. Every alternative facility in the area had 18-month waiting lists, except one, a premier center with immediate availability that cost 4 times what Maya could afford even if she worked herself to collapse. Standing in the hospital hallway, phone still pressed to her ear, Maya felt her world crumbling. And in that exact moment of despair, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I know who can help. Meet me at the old lighthouse at 7 p.m. tonight if you want to save your mother. Come alone." Maya's hands trembled. She had no idea who sent it. She had no idea that Daniel had desperately confided in his estranged younger sister about Maya's situation. And she had no idea that walking toward that lighthouse would bring her face to face with a truth that could destroy everything she thought she knew about the man she was falling for. The lighthouse stood against the evening sky like a forgotten sentinel, its paint peeling, its light long extinguished. Maya approached with her heart hammering, pepper spray clutched in her pocket, knowing this was probably foolish but desperate enough to risk it. A woman stepped out from the shadow of the structure, tall, elegant, with auburn hair and the kind of effortless beauty that suggested wealth carefully downplayed. She introduced herself as Isabel, and her first words made Maya's blood run cold. "You've been seeing my brother," Isabel said, not unkindly. "The man you know as Daniel Matthews." Maya shook her head. "Daniel doesn't have a sister. He told me. He told you what he tells everyone when he's hiding." Isabel pulled out her phone and showed Maya a photograph, a family portrait in front of a mansion that looked like something from a period drama. And there, standing uncomfortably beside an older couple, was Daniel. But the caption beneath the photo, from an old society magazine, read, "The Reid family, Patriarch Jonathan Reid with wife Eleanor and children Alexander and Isabel at their Connecticut estate." The ground seemed to tilt beneath Maya's feet. Reid. Alexander Reid. Even she knew that name, everyone knew that name. The Reid family owned half the technology infrastructure in the country. They were billionaires. And Daniel, Alexander, had been lying to her since the moment they met. "Why are you telling me this?" Maya whispered. Isabel's expression softened with something like sympathy. "Because my brother hasn't been happy in almost a decade. Because he's been hiding from everyone, including himself. And because I watched him light up when he talked about a waitress who taught piano to children and cared for her sick mother and still somehow found reasons to smile." She paused. "He was the one who saved you on the highway, Maya. He was the one who paid your hospital bills. And he's been anonymously funding your mother's care for the past 2 weeks. He just didn't tell you because he's terrified that once you know who he really is, you'll stop seeing him as a person and start seeing him as a number." Maya couldn't breathe. Every moment with Daniel, Alexander, replayed in her mind with new context. His vague answers about work. His discomfort when she'd once joked about rich people being out of touch. The way he'd looked at her when she talked about the stranger who saved her, like he was holding a confession behind his teeth. "I don't care about his money," Maya said, and she was shocked to realize she meant it completely. "I know," Isabel replied. "That's why I'm telling you. Because he doesn't believe someone like you exists. And he needs to learn that hiding forever isn't living, it's just dying slowly." Maya drove to Daniel's apartment that night, the address Isabel had given her, and knocked on his door with tears already streaming down her face. When he opened it, she saw the moment he understood, the way his expression shifted from surprised joy to dawning horror. "Maya, I can explain. Were you ever going to tell me?" Her voice broke. "About who you are? About the accident? About any of it?" He stood frozen, and his silence was its own answer. "I thought you were different," she whispered. "I thought we were building something real. But the whole time, you were just watching me like some charity case, some project to make yourself feel better about your privileged life." "That's not," he reached for her, but she stepped back. "I don't want your money, Alexander. I never did. I just wanted you. But I don't even know who that is anymore." She pressed her hand over her mouth to hold back a sob. "I need time. Please. Don't follow me." She walked away through a night that had started to rain again, and Alexander stood in his doorway watching her disappear, feeling like he was losing something essential he'd only just discovered. The days that followed were agony for both of them. Maya worked her shifts in numb silence, refusing calls from unknown numbers, trying to untangle her feelings from her fears. She had fallen for a man who didn't exist, or did he? The Daniel she knew was kind, attentive, genuinely interested in her ordinary life. He'd never tried to impress her with expensive gifts or grand gestures. He'd read paperback novels in corner booths and walked her home through unremarkable streets and listened like her words were precious. Was that all a performance? Or was that the real Alexander, the one hiding behind a fake name because his real one had brought him nothing but pain? Alexander, meanwhile, spiraled into the darkest depression he'd experienced in years. He'd finally found someone who made him feel like a person rather than a portfolio, and he destroyed it with the same paranoid secrecy that had kept him safe but alone. His sister called repeatedly. His mother sent concerned texts. He ignored them all, sitting in the dark of his empty apartment, holding the paperback novel Maya had once borrowed and returned with a sunflower pressed between its pages. She'd written a tiny note on the bookmark, "Thank you for making my days brighter." He'd made her days brighter. And then he'd made them dark again. On the 10th day, Maya visited her mother at the memory care facility, still open, still funded by Alexander's anonymous donations, which she now understood completely. Her mother sat by the window, eyes unfocused, hands folded in her lap. Maya held those hands and talked about nothing and everything, the way she always did, not knowing how much her mother understood. "I met someone, Mom," she whispered. "Someone who saved my life, literally. And I think I was starting to love him. But he lied to me. He hid who he was because he was scared." She paused, watching rain track down the window. "But I've been thinking. I've been scared too. Scared of trusting people. Scared of letting anyone in. Maybe we're not so different." Her mother's hand twitched slightly in hers. And in a rare moment of clarity, her mother turned to look at her with eyes that suddenly seemed present. "Forgiveness," her mother said softly, "isn't for them, sweetheart. It's for you." Then she drifted back into the fog, but Maya remained frozen, her mother's unexpected words settling into her heart like seeds. Cliffhanger 2, that evening, Maya made a decision. She would go to Alexander's apartment, the real one, the estate Isabel had mentioned, and demand the complete truth. But when she arrived at the address after a 45-minute drive into Connecticut's wealthiest neighborhood, she found something that stopped her cold. The gates were swarming with reporters. Cameras flashed. A news van displayed a headline on its screen, "Reid Scandal Exposed, Billionaire Heir's Secret Life Revealed, Family Demands He Choose Between Inheritance and Mystery Woman." Maya's own face appeared on screen, a photo clearly taken outside the diner without her knowledge. The vultures had found her. And now she understood exactly what Alexander had been hiding from all along. What she didn't know, as she sat paralyzed in her parked car, was that inside that mansion, Alexander was standing before his father, being given an ultimatum that would determine both their futures forever. Inside the Reid estate, Alexander faced his father across a mahogany desk that had witnessed 3 generations of power plays. Jonathan Reid was everything Alexander had tried not to become: cold, calculating, image-obsessed to the point of cruelty. "This is unacceptable," Jonathan said, his voice measured and lethal. "You've been photographed repeatedly with a waitress." "A waitress, Alexander. The tabloids are having a feeding frenzy. Our stock dipped 2 points this morning based on speculation alone." "Stock prices are your concern, not mine," Alexander replied, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. "I left the company 7 years ago. I have no public role in Reid Industries." "You are a Reid. You will always have a public role." His father's eyes narrowed. "I'll offer you a simple choice. End this ridiculous association, marry someone appropriate within the year, and your trust fund remains intact. Continue down this path, and you'll be cut off entirely. No inheritance. No family support. Nothing. For a moment, Alexander felt the old fear grip him, the terror of being cast out, of losing everything he'd been raised to depend upon. But then he thought of Maya. Maya, who worked double shifts and still found time to teach children piano. Maya, who fed stray cats behind the diner and remembered every customer's name and birthday. Maya, who had nothing and gave everything. Maya, who had walked away from him not because he was poor, but because he had lied. Keep your money, Alexander said quietly. I never wanted it anyway. He walked out of his father's office without looking back, past the shouting reporters, past the flashing cameras, past the life he'd been hiding from and hiding within simultaneously. He had no idea where Maya was. He only knew he needed to find her. Maya had circled back to the diner, not knowing where else to go. She sat in the empty building after closing time, her manager having given her the keys weeks ago out of trust. The streetlights outside flickered through rain-streaked windows. She held her phone, reading the tabloid articles that painted her as everything from a gold digger to a calculating seductress, feeling sick at how easily strangers could twist a love story into something ugly. The door chimed. She looked up. Alexander stood there, soaking wet, his expensive shirt clinging to his chest, his hair dripping, his eyes carrying an expression she'd never seen before, complete and total surrender. I drove to 7 places looking for you, he said, voice raw. Your apartment, the community center, the hospital, the park where we walked, I didn't know where else you might be. He took a shaky breath. I gave up my inheritance tonight. My father wanted me to choose between his money and you. And I chose you. I know you might never forgive me. I know I lied about everything that mattered. But Maya, I never lied about how I felt. Every moment with you was real. Every conversation, every walk, every time I looked at you and felt like I was finally breathing for the first time in years, that was all true. Maya stood slowly, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. Why didn't you tell me you were the one who saved me, she whispered. Because I didn't save you for gratitude, he said, stepping closer. I saved you because you were there, and I could, and the thought of not trying was unbearable. And afterward, I paid your bills anonymously because I saw you matter, saw that your life had value and purpose and light, and I wanted that light to keep existing in the world even if I never spoke to you again. His voice cracked. I didn't need your thanks, Maya. I just needed you to be okay. Tears spilled down her cheeks. You're an idiot, you know that? I know. You should have told me the truth. I know that too. Your father sounds like a monster. He is. And you really gave up billions of dollars for me? He laughed weakly, almost desperately. I'd give up the moon for you, Maya Chen. I'd give up air. I'd spend the rest of my life working double shifts at this diner if it meant I could make you coffee every morning and walk you home every night. She closed the distance between them and pressed her palm against his wet chest, feeling his heartbeat racing beneath her touch. I don't want your money, she said firmly. I never did. But I think I might want you. The real you. Not Daniel, not Alexander Reid the billionaire heir. Just the man who sat in my corner booth reading books and making me believe that maybe not everyone leaves. He cupped her face in his hands, and for a long moment, they stood like that, two broken people finding in each other the pieces they'd been missing. Can I tell you something? He murmured. Yes. That night on the highway, when I held you in the rain waiting for the ambulance, I made a promise. I told God, or the universe, or whatever force keeps broken things together, that if you survived, I'd spend the rest of my life being worthy of that miracle. He pressed his forehead to hers. I've done a terrible job so far. But if you give me another chance, I swear I will never lie to you again. I'll be worthy of the second chance we both got that night. Maya kissed him. It wasn't a careful kiss or a hesitant one, it was the kiss of two people who had nearly lost each other before they'd even begun. It was rain and relief and years of loneliness finally breaking against the shores of something real. The weeks that followed weren't easy. Tabloids published terrible stories. Alexander's father publicly disowned him. Maya received hate mail from strangers who believed she was a manipulative fortune hunter. But they faced it together. Alexander sold his apartment and used his personal savings, significant, but nothing compared to the family fortune, to buy a modest house in a modest neighborhood. He started working as a consultant for small tech startups, using his expertise without using his name. Maya continued at the diner, but now she came home to someone who cooked dinner for her and asked about her day and never, ever made her feel like she was less valuable because her income was small. They visited Maya's mother together. Alexander read to her from books about the Northern Lights, the ones he'd researched all those months ago, and Maya watched him hold her mother's hand with such gentleness that she knew, beyond all doubt, that she had found someone worth keeping. 1 year after the night Alexander walked into that diner, he took Maya to Iceland. They stood beneath an infinite sky painted with green and purple and breathless, swirling light. Maya wept openly, her childhood dream coming true in a way she'd never imagined. And there, beneath the aurora borealis, Alexander knelt in the snow and asked her to marry him with a ring that cost 1 month's salary, not the millions he could have spent when he was an heir, but something earned honestly, given genuinely. Yes, she said. 1,000 times yes. The wedding was small. His mother came, having quietly defied his father. His sister Isabel served as a witness. Maya's community center piano students performed a piece they'd composed themselves. And Maya's mother, in a wheelchair but dressed beautifully, had a moment of perfect clarity during the ceremony, long enough to say, "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," before drifting back into her own world. It was imperfect and beautiful and real. After the wedding, Alexander established a foundation in Maya's name, not with family money, but with earnings from his consulting work, growing slowly and ethically. The foundation provided financial support for families caring for loved ones with memory conditions. Maya continued teaching piano, eventually opening her own small studio. They adopted a stray dog who had been found, ironically, wandering alongside a highway during a storm. They named him Lucky. Some nights, Maya still woke from dreams of that rainy highway, that moment of impact she didn't remember, the seconds between life and death that she had slept through entirely. And on those nights, she rolled over to find Alexander already awake, already reaching for her, already murmuring, "I've got you," before she could even ask. He had saved her life. But in choosing her over comfort, truth over lies, and love over legacy, he had allowed her to save his. That was the miracle neither of them had expected, that rescue could be mutual, that healing could be shared, that two strangers on a rain-soaked highway could become each other's home. If this story touched your heart, reminded you that love finds us in unexpected places, or made you believe that second chances exist for those willing to fight for them, hit like and subscribe for more life-changing stories that celebrate the extraordinary hiding within ordinary lives. Sometimes the greatest blessings arrive disguised as strangers in the storm. Sometimes the richest people aren't the ones with the biggest bank accounts, but the ones with the courage to love without conditions. And sometimes, just sometimes, falling apart is just the beginning of being put back together by someone who sees your worth when you've forgotten it yourself.